After last week's terror attack in Streatham, South London, MPs have just approved emergency legislation to end the automatic release of people convicted of terrorist offences. Earlier, I caught up with the Conservative MP and influential chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Tom Tugendhat. Tom Tugendhat, why will ending the automatic release of terrorists make us that much safer?
Well, it's a step in the right direction, Andrew. It's very far from being a final answer. What it does is it prevents that release happening sooner. It gives a bit more time for legislation to pass. It gives a bit more time for other decisions to be made and see whether other charges that could have been brought may be brought.
But automatic release usually applies to those terrorists sentenced for a few years for relatively minor offences. If someone is dangerous when they're released after 18 months, why would they be any less dangerous after 3 years?
Well, I think that's an entirely fair point. As I say, this just buys a bit of extra time. But as you know, not every charge that is brought is the full charge that could have been brought. In many cases, a charge will be brought that allows a conviction, knowing that any other conviction may have required the release of more information than the intelligence services or the government were willing to give. So this allows a moment of reconsideration, because as we've seen recently, de-radicalisation programmes haven't worked as well as we'd hoped. And despite the fact that there is quite a lot of money going into them, we really do need to look at them again.
If the terrorist has served his or her full sentence and is still regarded as a danger, what should the government do?
Well, that's where TPIMs and other forms of control order come in. But look...
But you haven't used them. Your government hasn't used them.
Well, I'm not a spokesman for the government.
I understand that. Well,
the party hasn't used them. That's quite right. But
and they got rid of the control orders from the last Labour government.
Well, I think we've got...
Was that a mistake?
I think looking at the TPIMs is exactly what we should be doing. I think we've got to be looking at different forms of control orders. Control orders were stopped because the courts ruled against them, so we can't use them in the blanket fashion that the Labour government initially planned. They've got to be much more targeted. And so I think making sure that we get the right forms of control in place is absolutely essential.
You want a new Treason Act, and I think we can all agree that the existing one is kind of past its sell-by date since it comes from the 14th century. But what difference would a new Treason Act make?
Well, it adds a particular charge. Look, the Australian government did this in 2018. Other common law jurisdictions similar to ours have done this at various points in the last 10 years. There are different ways of updating it. As you know, the existing Act from 1351 is really focused on the person of the monarch. So it's either the monarch themselves or the monarch's officers or whatever. What we're looking at doing is extending, or rather changing the focus so that it's not the person of the monarch, but actually of the betrayal of the society to which you owe either allegiance or a duty in some form. And so what we're looking at doing, and that's, you know, this is why I wrote this with a couple of legal scholars, and actually with Khalid Mahmood, as you know, the Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Bar, to point out that actually this is about identifying very much who is part of our society as well, and therefore how duties are owed.
But are you really going to put away for 10, 20 years for treason people who've merely distributed pro-terrorist literature?
Well, not necessarily. Just in the same way as a murder charge doesn't necessarily attract a full-life tariff, a treason charge doesn't necessarily attract a full-life tariff either. I mean, you know...
But you say that in your policy paper, you say that in most cases of treason, people should be sentenced for life. Most cases, you say?
In most cases, when it is serious enough to bring a charge of treason, yes.
Sentenced for life for distributing treasonous material? But
that is not necessarily most cases. Most cases would be cases of violence, cases, and we're specific actually in the report that we talk about the intent to commit violence as well as the betrayal.
So but intent to commit violence, planning a terrorist attack, that already